I was a soldier. I was there. I saw the villages burn.
I know. My father knows too.
Rancher shelters. Apache Chief's daughter, what he found outside his cabin was unbelievable. The dawn didn't bring any bird songs or the familiar scent of dry grass on the high desert. Instead, there was this heavy silence, so thick I felt like the earth itself was holding its breath. I stood there, motionless, inside my weathered adobe shack, my calloused hand trembling a little on a cup of cold coffee. Through the dusty window, a sight sent a chill racing down my spine. Dozens of Apache warriors were lined up along my rotting fence, their faces painted in fierce colors, silent as living statues. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They just stared straight at my solitary cabin. I was no stranger to the desert's loneliness, nor to the howling wind that tore through the cliffs. But I had never known a silence like this, the kind that pressed on my chest, that told me one wrong move could summon death. I was a former cavalry soldier who had tasted enough gunpowder and blood, so I understood one thing. Silence was more dangerous than the roar of battle. One question tore at my mind. Why were they here? I was just an old hermit, living in isolation for 10 long years, keeping clear of everyone. Why would they surround me as if I were their sworn enemy? There was only one explanation. The night before, I had opened my barn doors to rescue a woman who had collapsed in the storm. I gave her shelter, even pressed my father's old dagger into her hand so she could protect herself. And now, with 100 blazing eyes fixed on my shack, I knew that woman was no ordinary wanderer. I'd lived alone on this land for nearly 10 years. Ever since a campaign I'd been part of had gone wrong, ending in a massacre, I'd built high fences, planted a few desert shrubs, and locked my heart away, as if it had been buried alongside the ghosts of the past. The prospectors and outlaws who occasionally passed through this stretch of Arizona desert called me the Stone of the Sangre de Cristo, half an insult, half a mark of respect. Anyone who could survive this long on this brutal frontier wasn't a man to take lightly. My adobe shack stood solitary in a sea of red rock and dry scrub, its back pressed against the rust-colored mountains, its front opening onto a plain that stretched clear to the horizon. Day after day, my world was nothing but the rustle of lizards, the distant call of a hawk, and the endless whistle of the wind. Over time, loneliness became a habit, and silence turned into my only companion. The night before, the sky had collapsed in a violent sandstorm. The wind howled like a demon. Dust swirled, blinding and suffocating, as I was securing the horse stable. I caught sight of a figure staggering through the sheets of sand and rain. A woman, her long black hair clung to her pale face. Her deerskin dress was soaked through. She moved as though each step was a battle against some unseen enemy. "You need shelter," I rasped, raising my voice above the gale. The woman turned, and in a flash of lightning, I saw her eyes deep, dark, filled with both fear and defiance. She shook her head and whispered, "I cannot stay. My people, they will worry." But then the icy wind struck again, and her body trembled. In that moment, I remembered a promise I'd made to myself long ago, after the nightmares had begun. You may have done wrong, but you can still do right. Without hesitation, I unfastened the canteen at my belt and offered her a drink, then draped a heavy wool blanket over her shoulders. "Keep it until the storm clears," I said. She looked at the canteen, her fingers trembling, as though it was more than just water, as though it carried the weight of an oath. When she raised her eyes again, her gaze pierced me, and I felt as if my scarred heart had just been touched for the first time in years. "I will remember your name," she whispered. Before I could invite her into the cabin, she vanished into the storm like a ghost, leaving behind only hurried footprints in the mud. And this morning, 100 Apache warriors standing silent beyond the fence were the answer. That woman was no stranger. She was the daughter of Chief Broken Lance, the fierce leader of the Chiricahua in this land. Now I understood why the entire tribe looked upon me with suspicion, as if my single act of kindness last night had sparked a storm far more dangerous than nature itself. The wooden door trembled with a heavy rhythm. I set down my cup of coffee, my calloused hands clenching tight. I knew it was only a matter of time before I had to face them. Outside, My horse stirred restlessly, but the Apache warriors stood still, silent as ghosts beneath the rising sun. Then a figure stepped forward from their ranks, tall, broad-shouldered, draped in a wolf pelt with eagle feathers crowning his headdress. His eyes were dark and unreadable, carrying the terrifying calm of a man who commanded 100 lives. Ethan Stone. The deep voice rang out, steady and sharp, without a trace of hesitation. "You know why we are here?" I drew a slow breath, opened the door, and stepped onto the porch. "I do not," I answered, my voice rough from years of silence, though my gaze did not waver. The chief gave a small nod, as if the reply only confirmed what he had already believed. "I am Broken Lance, and the woman you met last night." His eyes narrowed, sharp as a spear point, "is my daughter." The words struck like a stone tumbling through a canyon. I froze. The image of the trembling woman in the storm flashed back to me, her hand clutching the blanket, her sad smile, her warning whispered in the wind. "If they know I am here, you will be in danger too." I swallowed hard and shook my head. She was exhausted. I only gave her shelter. I did not know who she was. Broken Lance stepped closer, his expression calm, but his presence storm-like. The necklace in her hand, "It was yours?" "No," I admitted. "It was hers." The line of warriors rippled with murmurs like wind stirring restless grass. Among the Apache, a necklace was not merely an adornment. It was a vow, a sacred bond of trust. For a lonely hermit to be found with the relic of a chief's daughter was nothing short of crossing into forbidden ground. Broken Lance's eyes narrowed, searching me as though he could peel away every hidden truth. "Do you know?" he said softly. "In our people, a woman gives a necklace only to the one she trusts with her life." Silence fell heavy. Sweat broke across my brow, though the morning air was still cold. I had not meant to trespass into their sacred laws. Yet the truth had dragged me into the heart of it. From within the ranks, a voice suddenly shouted, "If Ayanna was here, then he knows where she is." The name cut the air like a blade. I stiffened. Now I knew her name. Ayanna. And I knew this was no longer a matter of nameless kindness. Broken Lance raised his hand, silencing the warriors. His gaze locked on me both a judgment and a plea. "My daughter vanished last night. She has not returned to the camp. And you? You are the last man to see her alive." I swallowed the knot in my throat, my hand drifting to the grip of my revolver. In that instant, I understood. Fate had bound me to a storm from which there was no escape. "Where did she go?" Broken Lance asked, his voice now a low rumble. "Tell me and I will not touch a hair on your head." The offer was simple, yet it carried the weight of a blood debt. I could have lied, could have sent them on a false trail to save my own skin. But the memory of Ayanna's terrified eyes, her trembling form against the wind, stayed my tongue. "I don't know," I said, the words a raw confession. She disappeared into the storm. A fresh wave of murmurs, of disbelief and anger, surged through the Apache ranks. Broken Lance's face hardened, his hand tightening on the hilt of his own knife. "You lie," he spat. "My daughter would not abandon her people, not without a reason." I shook my head, looking directly into the chief's eyes. "She wasn't running from you, Chief. She was running from someone else." The words hung in the air, a shocking revelation. Broken Lance's eyes widened, a flicker of doubt in their depths. "Who?" he demanded. I pointed to the faint tracks in the dry mud leading away from my shack. "Look there. Her footprints are mixed with heavy boot prints. Someone was chasing her." Broken Lance knelt, his weathered fingers brushing the earth. The warriors gathered around, their gazes shifting from anger to stunned realization. They saw what I saw. Not the hurried steps of a runaway, but the desperate, staggered strides of a hunted woman, with the distinct, heavy tread marks of a man in pursuit. "You saw what I did not," Broken Lance murmured, his voice laced with a strange new respect. "Perhaps you were not lying." The admission did little to soften the hatred in the warrior's eyes, who still saw me as a potential enemy. Yet, it planted something strange within me, the feeling of being heard. For years, no one had cared for my words. Not even I had bothered to listen to myself. Now, a man who minutes ago would have killed me without a second thought was beginning to trust me. That night, we camped by a stream. I sat alone by the fire, turning the silver necklace Ayana had left behind between my hands. I listened to the horses breathe, to the men speaking in a language I only half understood. In that moment, I realized I was standing on the border of two worlds, one of loneliness that had imprisoned me for a decade, and another of fierce but unbreakable kinship. And between them, a mysterious woman who carried a storm in her shadow. The road to her rescue would not be an easy one, for the tracks they followed were the marks of a skilled tracker, a professional hunter. They led north, toward the notorious mining town of Redemption, a lawless hellhole where men's lives were worth less than the gold they sought. The next morning, Broken Lance and I rode side by side, a stark contrast between the weathered cavalrymen and the proud chief. The warriors kept their distance, their suspicion a tangible presence in the air. I felt the weight of their judgment, yet I also felt a strange kind of purpose, a calling I hadn't felt since the war. I was no longer just a hermit hiding from my past. I was now on a quest, not just for Ayana's sake, but for my own redemption. As we neared the outskirts of Redemption, we found a small, abandoned camp. Broken Lance dismounted and knelt, examining a worn-out saddlebag. "This is not ours," he said, his voice grim. "It belongs to a bounty hunter." He held up a grimy wanted poster. The face on it was familiar to me, a man with a cold, cruel smirk and eyes that had seen too much death. "Reed Carter," I whispered, the name a bitter taste in my mouth. He was one of the cavalrymen I had served with, the most brutal and ruthless of the bunch. Reed was known for his cold-blooded efficiency, his willingness to do anything for money. "He's the one who took her," I said, a newfound certainty hardening my voice. Broken Lance looked at me, a question in his eyes. "You know him?" I swallowed hard. "I did. We served together. He was a good soldier, a bad man. The two of us were now bound by a shared enemy." We rode on into the town of Redemption, a place where the stench of whiskey, gunpowder, and desperation hung heavy in the air. The streets were a chaotic mix of prospectors, saloon girls, and drifters. Broken Lance, a few of his warriors, and I moved through the crowds, our presence a silent, menacing force. We split up, searching every saloon, every brothel, every back alley. I, my hand on my revolver, felt the familiar tension of a raid, the memory of my past missions flooding back. But this time, I wasn't looking to kill. I was looking to save. I found a young Chinese woman cowering in a dark corner of a saloon, her eyes wide with fear. She spoke only a little English, but with my help, she managed to communicate that she had seen a man matching Reed Carter's description with a beautiful Indian woman. "He took her to the old mine," she whispered, pointing toward the Red Mountains. "He said he would sell her to the men there." The revelation was a hammer blow to my gut. The old mine was a place of ill repute, a labyrinth of tunnels where men had gone to die. Reed Carter had taken Ayana there not to kill her, but to sell her into a life worse than death. The bounty wasn't for her, but for something else. What? I didn't know, but I knew one thing. I would find out. I would not allow the past to repeat itself. I would not let another innocent person suffer because of a man I had once called a brother. I looked at Broken Lance, whose face was a mask of grim determination. "He's at the old mine," I said. "He's going to sell her." Broken Lance nodded, a silent understanding passing between us. The warriors mounted their horses, their eyes burning with a righteous fury. I, despite my deep-seated desire for solitude, felt a strange sense of belonging, a connection to these men who were once my sworn enemies. I was no longer a lone hermit, but a man with a purpose, with a debt to pay. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in a fiery blaze of orange and red, as we rode toward the mouth of the mine, toward the final confrontation, and toward a chance for me to finally face the demons of my past. The air grew heavier with every step I took into the mouth of that mine. It was not just the weight of the mountain pressing down on me. It was the weight of memory, of guilt, of sins I had carried for too many years. The cold clung to my clothes. The stench of damp rock and old dust filled my lungs. Each breath felt like inhaling the ghosts of men who had worked and died here, their whispers stitched into the darkness. Behind me, Broken Lance moved like a shadow, his warriors silent as stone, and yet I felt alone, utterly, miserably alone. For this was not just a descent into tunnels of wood and ore, it was a descent into the very heart of my shame. The sun's last light had vanished behind the ridge. Outside, the world still had color, but here, in this hollow mountain, only shadows remained. Our lanterns flickered, sending long, crooked figures dancing across the walls, shapes that seemed too human to be mere tricks of light. I tightened my grip on the lantern, as though it could hold back not only the dark, but the past itself. Yet nothing, not the flame, not the silence, not the company of allies, could save me from the memories pressing in with every dripping sound of water and every creak of the old beams. My heart beat against my ribs like a drum of war, yet I was no warrior now. I was a haunted man walking willingly into his own trial. War had made me, but it had also broken me. And here, inside this mine, I felt the fracture widening. Every turn of the tunnel carried me back to that other night, the one I had tried to bury beneath silence and drink. The smell of burnt wood filled my nose, though here nothing burned. I heard screams and the dripping of water, though here no one screamed. I saw again the village aflame, the Apache families scattering like sparks into the wind, and above it all, the laughter of soldiers who wore the same uniform I once wore. Reed Carter's laughter. God help me. I remembered his eyes, cold as steel and twice as sharp. He had been my comrade, my commander, and yet more beast than man. While I, green, uncertain, barely grown, stood powerless, swallowed by the machine of war. I had tried to stop him once, to speak against the slaughter, but my voice had broken against his cruelty. Since then, my guilt had followed me like a starving wolf. It drove me into the desert, into silence, into solitude. I thought the land might wash me clean, but now, here, in this mine, I saw the truth. I had never escaped. The past had only been waiting for me in the dark. The tunnels opened suddenly into a cavern, and my lantern's light caught her first Ayanna. She was bound to a beam with rough rope, her arms pulled tight, her face pale in the glow. Her eyes found me instantly, wide with fear, but also with that silent plea I will never forget. Help me. And then I saw him, Reed Carter. He stood before her like some dark idol, a revolver at his hip, and in his hand a small carved totem, Apache work, delicate and sacred. He turned it in his fingers as though it were nothing but a trinket from a stall. His smirk spread when he saw me, the same smirk that had haunted my sleep for years. Well, look who crawled out of his hole, he sneered, his voice echoing through the chamber. Stone, I never thought I'd see you again. Though, his eyes gleamed with a satisfaction that made my stomach twist. Look what I found, he went on, jerking his head toward Ayanna. A high-born Apache, worth a fortune on the market, and more than that, she's a perfect symbol, a way to show her people that their spirit can be broken, just like their bodies. I felt the rage rise in me, cold and sharp. My hand went to my revolver, though I did not draw. Let her go, Reed, I said, my voice low, broken, but steady enough to carry. This isn't your fight. Reed laughed, the sound bitter and ugly in the stale air. Not my fight? You're wrong, Stone. It's always been my fight. And yours, too. You just never had the stomach for it. He raised his gun then, leveled it at Ayanna's head. Time slowed to nothing, every drop of water, every flicker of flame stretched into eternity. Now you've got a choice, he said. Walk away and live, or stay and die just like the rest of them. Lo? My body tensed, my hand on the worn handle of my revolver, sweat cold on my back. I knew Reed. He was faster than me, faster than most. A killer born, a wolf in man's skin. But I also knew myself, or at least the self I wanted to be. For years I had run from this moment, run from him, run from what he made me. And now there was nowhere left to run. This was no longer just a rescue. It was a reckoning. I looked at Ayanna, her dark eyes wet with terror, her body trembling against the ropes. She had no words, only that look, that plea. And in it I saw the faces of the villagers, the children, the innocents I had failed to save before. The guilt that had poisoned me now became something else, fuel, fire, resolve. I would not fail her. Not her. Not again. I won't run this time, I told him, my voice steady though my heart was breaking my ribs. "I won't hide. You and me, Reed. Let's end it." His grin widened, sick with pleasure. "I thought you'd never find your spine." Thus, we stepped into the center of the cavern, the lanterns throwing our shadows into monstrous shapes against the walls. The world shrank to nothing but him and me, predator and prey, though I swore to God I would not be the prey tonight. The silence pressed in, thick as stone. Even the mine itself seemed to hold its breath. Broken Lance and his men waited in the shadows, hands on their weapons, but they did not move. They knew this was mine, my burden, my demon, my fight. Reed's hand hovered above his revolver, and I felt my own fingers twitch against the grip of mine. In that breathless moment, I remembered everything, the screams, the fire, the blood, the laughter, all the weight I had carried, and I knew that if I lost here, it would never end. He moved first, a blur, faster than lightning. His first shot rang out, shattering the silence, but I had already thrown myself aside, the bullet sparking against stone. Another shot, closer, tearing the air near my ear. My ears rang, but my focus held. I drew and fired. Once. The sound crashed through the cavern like thunder. Reed staggered, disbelief written across his face. His revolver clattered to the ground, his smirk fading into something hollow, something human. For a moment, I saw not the monster but the man beneath, and then he fell. Silence. I stood there, chest heaving, revolver smoking in my hand, heart hammering like a war drum. My legs trembled beneath me, but I stayed standing. I had faced him, faced the shadow that had followed me for years. I crossed to Ayanna, cut the ropes with a trembling hand. She sagged into freedom, her hands going to her face, brushing away the dried trails of tears. When her eyes lifted to mine, they were filled not only with fear but with something more, something I did not deserve. Admiration, perhaps, trust. The warriors emerged then from the shadows, faces hard, eyes unreadable. Broken Lance stepped forward, his gaze locked on me. His voice was low, like distant thunder. "You saved her," he said. "You have honored your name, and you have honored the Apache." I could not meet his eyes. My gaze fell to the ground, to the dust, to the blood soaking into the rock. I had won. I had saved her. But victory felt hollow, a cup filled with ash. The past did not vanish with Reed's fall. It still lived inside me, a scar carved deep into my soul. I had faced my demon, yes, but scars do not heal in a night. The road to redemption is long, and I had only taken the first step. So I breathed the cold air of that cavern, and I told myself I would keep walking. For Ayanna, for the innocence I could never save, for the man I still prayed I might become. The air outside the mine felt sharper, almost cruel in its purity. After the suffocating stench of stale cavern breath, I drew it into my lungs as though I had been drowning, each inhale a jagged reminder that I was still alive. The desert stretched before us in vast silence, the red rocks gleaming in the late morning sun, their shapes carved by time and wind into monuments of endurance. Beside me rode Ayanna, weary but unbroken, her back straight despite the rope burns still raw on her wrists. Broken Lance and his warriors flanked us at a respectful distance, their eyes upon me no longer brimming with suspicion, but touched with something heavier. Respect, perhaps, or judgment deferred. I felt the change in the air, subtle yet undeniable, like the shift of the wind before a storm. Once, I had been nothing to them but an intruder, an ex-soldier, a man marked by the uniform of their enemy. Now, though I did not speak their tongue fluently, I could feel it in their glances. I had crossed some invisible threshold. By drawing my weapon in that cavern, by facing down Reed Carter, and choosing to fight for something greater than my own haunted silence, I had earned a place among them. It was not acceptance freely given. It was a heavy coin pressed into my palm, one I would forever owe them interest on. We rode until the desert sun burned the sweat from our brows, stopping at last near a spring that trickled from beneath a ledge of stone. Its water shimmered in the light, a fragile promise of life in a land that cared little for men's struggles. We dismounted, the warriors spreading out in watchful silence while I built a small fire. My hands shook slightly as I stacked the kindling. I told myself it was fatigue. Deep inside, I knew it was something else, the tremor of a soul too long burdened, too suddenly lightened by survival. Ayana sat across from me as the flames licked upward. She touched the silver necklace I had returned to her, her slender fingers tracing the etched lines like one might read scripture. The firelight cast her face in hues of bronze and gold, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun leaned toward its slow descent. "Why did you come for me?" Her voice was soft, like wind passing through tall grass. It carried no accusation, only wonder. I kept my eyes on the fire, afraid of what I might see in hers. "Because I had a debt," I said. My voice cracked like an old hinge. "Not to you, to myself." Her silence pressed against me, heavy yet patient. At last, she placed her hand upon mine, her skin warm against my calloused knuckles. "You did not owe me anything," she whispered. "You did not know me." Lo! I turned then, forcing myself to meet her gaze. For so long I had shut myself away from human eyes, fearing the reflection of my sins in them. Yet hers held no contempt, no condemnation, only clarity, like the still surface of a lake that sees all yet judges none. "I knew enough," I managed. "I knew you were being hunted. I knew a wrong was about to be done. I just couldn't let it happen again." Vess, her eyes searched mine, as though weighing the truth of my words against the heavy ledger of history. Finally, she nodded, the faintest movement, but it carried the gravity of absolution. "You are not like them," she said quietly. "The other soldiers." The word struck me like a lash. Soldier, a title once worn with pride, now rusted with blood and ashes. I flinched, though I tried not to. My chest tightened. The truth clawed at my throat until I let it out. "I was a soldier," I admitted, my voice low, hoarse. "I rode with the cavalry. I was there, in the raids. I saw the villages burn. I saw your people fall." The confession tasted of iron, of dust. It was the poison I had carried in my veins for 10 long years, now spilled at last upon the earth. Ayana did not withdraw her hand. Instead, she pressed it firmer against mine, as though anchoring me to the present. "I know," she said simply. "My father knows too. He has known for a long time." "Lo!" I stared at her, stunned. "How could he? How could you still?" Her eyes grew distant, their depths filled with memories I could not fathom. "The man you fought in the cavern, Reed Carter, he was no soldier of honor. He was a traitor. He sold our names, our camps, to the government. He led your cavalry to us, guided your hands as they struck. The blood spilled that day was not yours alone to carry." Her words cracked something inside me. For years I had borne the massacre like a chain, each link forged of shame and helplessness. I had thought myself complicit, an unworthy man who had failed to resist evil. But hearing her truth was like feeling a blade drawn slowly from my chest, painful, yet freeing. I was not innocent, no, never that. But perhaps I was not the monster I had believed myself to be. I had been a pawn, a boy soldier fed into the gears of cruelty by men like Carter. Relief warred with bitterness in me. My guilt had been my punishment, my anchor in solitude. Now it shifted, loosened, leaving me afloat in waters I no longer recognized. I lifted my eyes to hers again. "Why didn't you leave him, when you had the chance?" Ayana's gaze drifted skyward, to the constellations beginning to prick the velvet dusk. "Because I was on a journey," she murmured, "a test of my spirit. I sought to know if I was worthy to lead my people one day, to walk alone into the world, to face its dangers, and to return stronger. That was my path. And you," her eyes returned to mine, softened now, "you became a part of it." I swallowed hard, the firelight flickering between us. "You taught me," she continued, "that even in the darkest places, there is still a light, that a man can turn from death toward life, that a soldier can choose to heal instead of to destroy." Liz. Her words slid into the hollows of my soul, filling spaces I thought would remain barren until death. I felt something stir in me, fragile yet insistent, like a green shoot breaking through scorched earth. It was love. Not the wild, youthful fire that consumes, but a deeper, older flame born of shared wounds, of respect, of the fragile hope that two broken souls might mend each other. I turned away, for fear she might see the tears threatening at the corners of my eyes. The next morning, we broke camp and rode toward the Apache encampment. The air was cool, the desert alive with birdsong and the whisper of wind over stone. As we neared the cluster of lodges, the people gathered, their faces etched with suspicion that melted, slowly, into welcome. Broken Lance rode beside me, his face solemn as carved granite. He spoke at last, his voice like distant thunder. "You have proven yourself," he said. "You risked your life for my daughter, for my people. You are no longer an outsider." He gestured toward the tribe, their hands lifting in greeting, their eyes no longer hard with distrust. "You are our brother, Ethan Stone." I tried to speak, but my throat closed around the words. I could only nod, the weight of it pressing against my chest like a stone both crushing and anchoring me. I had found a family, a place to belong, a home I had thought forever denied me. Yet even as their acceptance wrapped around me like a cloak, I knew my journey was far from over. The past was not erased, it lingered still, a scar upon my soul. But now, for the first time in years, I dared believe that scars could also be maps. And perhaps, just perhaps, they might guide me toward redemption. The sun climbed high, baking the red earth as Ayanna and I rode back toward her people. The horses' hooves beat a steady rhythm, sending up dust that hung in the dry air like smoke. Every breath I drew tasted of sand and memory. The desert stretched endlessly before us, and though I had walked it for years as a hermit, it felt changed now, alive with a warmth that wasn't only the sun's doing. It was the warmth of belonging, something I hadn't felt since I was a boy, too young to know what belonging even meant. When the Apache camp came into view, the land seemed to breathe. The people poured out like water breaking free, their cries echoing against the red cliffs. Songs rose, sharp and fierce, the kind of sounds that came from deep in the chest, not the throat. They greeted Ayanna with arms that clutched her tight, voices filled with relief and pride. Her father, Broken Lance, strode forward, his face as hard as the stones around us, but his eyes were wet. He held her as if he might never let go again. I stayed at the edge of that circle of joy, my hands heavy at my sides, my throat dry. It was not my place to share in their embrace, not my right to stand among them. I was an outsider, a man who had once ridden with soldiers who tore these same people from their homes, burned their villages, stole their lives. My presence was a shadow against their firelight, a ghost standing at the edge of something pure. And yet, when Ayanna turned her face and found me through the crowd, her eyes softened. She smiled, a small, secret thing, and for a moment, I let myself believe I wasn't alone. That night, the camp sang long into the dark. They danced with the rhythm of drums, their voices lifting toward the stars as though calling back their ancestors. I sat apart, by a smaller fire near the horses, the shadows my only companions, but she came to me, as I somehow knew she would. Ayanna lowered herself onto the earth at my side, her dress still smelling of wood smoke and sage. The fire lit her face in a way that made her look older, wiser, as if the desert itself had carved her features. We didn't speak for a long time. Words were too clumsy, too heavy. We let the silence carry us, let the flames and the night fill the spaces our hearts could not. Her hand reached out, brushing mine, and the touch was like cool water in a land that knew only thirst. At last, her voice broke the quiet. "What will you do now?" she asked, so softly I might have thought it was the wind. "My father. He offers you a place here, with us." I stared into the fire, watching the logs collapse into embers. The flames danced like restless spirits, always rising, always vanishing. "I don't know," I admitted. My voice sounded rough in my own ears, like boots grinding over stone. "I can't stay. My past, it's a tangle of things too dark, too twisted, and I can't go back either. Not to the army, not to the towns where I'm just another drifter, a man with nothing but ghosts. The desert," I paused, tasting the word. "The desert is all I have. It's where I belong." She looked at me then, really looked, as though she were reading the lines carved into my face the way her people read the stars. "You have a place with me," she whispered. Her hand closed around mine. "If you choose it." The breath caught in my chest. I had been starving for so long, and here was food I didn't know how to eat. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to fold myself into the promise in her voice, to let her belief wash away the years of blood on my hands. And yet, I knew better. I smiled faintly, though it felt like it tore at me. "I know," I said. My throat tightened around the words. "But your path is here, with your father, with your people, and mine." I shook my head. "Mine isn't finished yet. I don't even know what it is. I only know I have to find it." Her eyes glistened in the firelight, but she didn't argue. That was her strength. She saw me as I was, broken and unfinished, and she did not try to mend me. She only accepted the cracks. We sat until the stars wheeled overhead, and the fire burned low, until sleep claimed the camp around us, and the drums faded to memory. When at last we parted, no words of farewell were spoken. We didn't need them. Our silence carried more weight than promises ever could. Morning came cold and pale, the desert painted in streaks of gold and violet. I saddled my horse with hands that shook more than I'd like to admit. Across the camp, Ayanna stood by the dying fire, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders. She didn't call out, she didn't weep, she only watched. When I swung into the saddle, she walked to my side. Her hand found my knee, her touch grounding me like roots in shifting sand. She looked up at me, her eyes fierce, alive with that wild love that no chain could ever hold. "Go," she said simply. Her voice was steady, though I could hear the ache beneath it. "The desert is waiting, and when you are ready—" She paused, her thumb brushing the worn leather of my boot. "You will find me." For a moment, everything in me begged to stay, to step down, to fall into her arms, to surrender. But surrender had never been my way, and I knew if I loved her truly, I could not bind her life to my uncertain road. I nodded once, my chest tight, my eyes burning against the rising sun. I looked at her one last time, memorizing her face, the way the light caught in her hair, the quiet strength in her jaw. Then I turned my horse toward the horizon. The hooves struck stone, sending echoes into the morning silence. Behind me, the camp faded into smoke and shadow. Before me, the desert stretched wide and merciless, but it did not feel empty anymore. It felt alive, full of promise, full of roads yet untraveled. I did not ride toward a destination. I rode toward the unknown, toward the endless horizon, toward a future unwritten. For the first time in 10 years, I was not running from ghosts. I was riding to meet whatever lay ahead. And somewhere, in the shifting sands and the wide sky, I carried her with me, not as a chain, but as a flame that would never die. The desert opened wide before me, endless and merciless. Yet for the first time it did not feel like a cage. The horizon stretched in colors I could not name, bleeding orange into violet, violet into blue, as though the heavens themselves were painting a road for me to follow. My horse moved steady beneath me, the creak of leather and the soft thud of hooves, the only sounds against the morning silence. Still, my chest ached. Every mile that grew between me and that camp felt like tearing sinew from bone. I told myself I had made the right choice, that Ayanna's life was meant for more than following a man haunted by ghosts. But the truth is, I wanted her beside me. I wanted to hear her laughter when the desert nights grew too long. I wanted her hand resting lightly on mine when the darkness pressed too close. A gust of wind swept across the plain, carrying the faintest trace of sage smoke. For a moment, I could almost believe it was her breath, whispering against my ear. I closed my eyes and saw her as she had stood that morning, shawl drawn around her shoulders, eyes unflinching, love burning there like a fire that even the strongest storm could not snuff out. "You have a place with me," she had said. The words echoed inside me, not as a chain, but as a compass. They would guide me when the desert grew too wide, when the nights turned too cold. I thought back to the years I had spent wandering, drowning in whiskey and silence, hiding from the man I had become. I had believed myself beyond redemption, a shadow stumbling through a land already claimed by death. And yet, in her eyes, I had found something I thought forever lost, the possibility of grace. The desert does not forgive, but it teaches. Every rock, every canyon, every merciless sun had carved me into the man I was now. And maybe that man was not whole, not healed, but he was no longer broken beyond repair. She had seen